Okay, shall we start? Does this work? We're just waiting for Jeff to zone in. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. A really warm welcome to all of you. I would like to say another warm welcome to our audience, which is a real hybrid. We've got students, current students.
Can't get any sound.
I've got sound, but they won't let me have my mic on.
Alison, could you make sure that
Can you turn it up?
Could you mute people online? Yeah.
You can use everyone.
Could you guys online mute yourself, please? Because there is some echoing coming in from domestic environments such as kitchens. Thank you. So a warm welcome to the audience who are here today. A real mixture, current students from the MA and the undergrads and PhD creative writing. But why I especially focus on students is because there are alumni students here today who, from previous years, from the past 13 years I've been working here since, who have known Alan really, really well. And I think it's important to mention that the students who are here today also are from that decade. Also, the public from the city of Sheffield or further afar, friends and staff from both universities, really. I would like to say another special thank you to the contributors who are fellow writers, poets, artists, composers, publishers. Difficult to say from what other areas we're all here coming from today, but we're all here basically today to gather together for tonight's 2.5, 3 hour long event to celebrate and remember the poet, friend, artist, composer, bookseller, editor, bibliophile, scholar, humorist, staunch topper. Again, for us, very important, affiliated poet at the Center for Poetry and Poetics for the past 13 years. Logoclast, constructor and deconstructor of words and language, Alan Halsey, or Halsey, his life and his work. Everything you're going to hear tonight is going to be about and of and by Alan. Imagine tonight's performance or series of talks, tributes, performances, readings, recordings as a rich and expansive canvas or some sort of tapestry, a unique of a unique body of work, including tributes by Professor Adam Piette and Geraldine Monk, readings from the various poetry collections to be read by Alan's friends and fellow writers and contemporaries, published by Alan's 2 or 3 major presses, 5 Seasons, Shearsman and Gargoyle. But there will be readings from unpublished work as well, miscellanea and marginalia, unread or unheard before. Parts of collaborations Alan took part in with fellow writers and artists, and also performances he composed or co-composed, for example, for Juxtavoices, the anti-choir Alan co-directed with composer and artist Martin Archer, who is here today. Not to mention the actual presence of Alan's books we have on display today, run by David Bartholomew. From Next Chapter Books from Sheffield, books written, as far as I can understand, by Alan, but also edited by Alan's former West House books he ran for nearly 16 years. Our contributors, after the talks and the Juxtavoices performance, will be coming up in alphabetical order, and there will be a very short break somewhere in the middle, just before L, i.e. me. It will be the order. Actually, you've got the little program in front of you, we printed out, so you can actually follow the texts the poets, fellow writers and friends have chosen for tonight. Not everything will be covered on the bibliography, but we'll try and squeeze in as much text and as many poems, published and unpublished, as possible. The contributors are Tim Allen, obviously Martin Archer and Juxtavoices, and I would like to say some sort of an apology to the choir or anti-choir itself or themselves, because I haven't actually got a list of the names of anti-singers, but a very, very warm welcome, and we are very grateful that you're going to do this, and I can't wait. Andrew Brewerton, Kelvin, Corcoran, Ian Davidson, Dan Eltringham. Patricia Farrell is not going to be able to make it tonight, but Simon Smith is going to read on her behalf. Alan Fisher, Tony Fraser, Harry G. Lonis, Jeff Hilson, Elizabeth Smith, myself, my name is Agnes Lehoczky, by the way, Tony Lopez, Simon Parrell, Adam Piette, with Kelvin, Francis Presley, and Gavin Solari cannot be here tonight either, sadly, but Gavin has sent us a beautiful recording Adam is going to play. You have to really appreciate our technical sort of synchronicity. Whatever is happening here is like 5 different things. Nothing was working when we first entered the room, but things seems to be going all right. It's not our forte. Robert Shepard can't make it tonight. Simon Smith, Glenn Storhag, Harriet Harlow, and Scott Thurston. After the reading, in the somewhere in the middle, we will have a short break. The evening, I thought, can only be complete by a reading from the poet himself. Our main contributor today is Alan Halsey, the Logoclast himself. This reading we are going to record and show to you is a recording of Alan's last reading he gave us in May 2020. And it was bang in the middle of the first national lockdown. So it's virtual reading. And to be frank with you, in retrospect, how lucky in fact the situation was, even though at the time I remember both Geraldine and Alan were pretty annoyed because we were going to have an in-person reading, but it didn't happen. But if we had had an in-person reading, we wouldn't have recorded it because we weren't recording in those times, etc. The virtual event at the time was entitled The A to Z Machine, and the reason I'm mentioning it is because Anne is going to tell you a little bit about it during this heart-stoppingly beautiful reading, I can promise you. So I think I have mentioned everything. Let's start, and I would like to ask Adam Piette to kick off. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming.
Alan Halsey, his life and works, his astonishing achievements, his presence in the world as poet, publisher, artist, and his legacy. Alan was born in Croydon on 22nd September 1949, the only child of Leonard and Renee Halsey, and celebrated his 73rd birthday last year. He studied philosophy at university and had a philosopher's experimental and analytical knowledge of languages, logic, and obliquities. He set up his bookshop in Hay-on-Wye, the Poetry Bookshop, with poet Anne Stevenson, and ran the bookshop for nearly 20 years, from 1979 to 1997, as proprietor from 1981. As the present-day book people running the bookshop stated about Alan's careful curatorship, his interest seemed boundless, whether in terms of modern innovative poetry or its most arcane 18th and 19th century practitioners. Even after all this time, that knowledge, all garnered in pre-internet times, remains an impossible act to follow. He founded West House Books and then met and joined Heart and Mind with Geraldine Monk in 1997. They ran the press together after the move to Sheffield, often working in association with his lifelong friend and publisher, Glenn Storhag of 5 Seasons Press. The press brought out over 50 books with writers like Jesse Glass, Steve McCaffrey, Chris Cheek, often working in association with 5 Seasons Press, while some were collaborative ventures with North American publishers, Chax, Coach House, Ahadada, and Book Thug. The press's output was also included pamphlets issued under the Gargoyle imprint. That extraordinary knowledge of and dedication to sponsoring, collecting, curating of books, of poetry, with deep, deep knowledge of the dark romantics, Shelley, Blake, accompanied a lively and punchy, scholarly, intricate, and lyrical practice as one of the best satirist poets of his generation. Battling it out in the small press networks of the innovative and revival scenes, he developed a remarkable reputation on both sides of the pond with his sprightly, shockingly fine work. Unparalleled in its nervy, witty, serpentine, tonal strike force, its sudden lyrical jets and pulses, the sheer brain power of the experiments in form and pastiche translation, multiplex voicings and revoicings. His double achievement as book sponsor and poet come together in his editorial care for writers risking neglect. The tremendous edition of Bill Griffiths, in the edition of Thomas Love Beddoes' Death's Jest book, which he accompanied with the superb meditation on sex and death, his skeleton key. His own work ranged from the probing political and poetic meditations and philosophical wit compositions in 5 Years Out, the weird and wonderful experiments in found and joyfully manipulated texts, the text of Shelley's Death, a Robin Hood book, and the many collaborations with Kelvin, Corcoran, Gavin Solari, Karen McCormack, so many others, all marked by profound political consciousness, struck into electric being by the testing, visionary, and Blakean burlesque and transformational invective. The outstanding work over the decades was brought together in Wittgenstein's Devil, then more comprehensively in the incomparable Marginalia, which reviewers called a truly exhilarating volume, Delphic, intractable, limpid, and lyrical. A poetry of passionate and stoical resistance, the work of a logo Daedalus. And that was followed by Salt's Not Everybody Remotely Selected Poems, 1978, 2004. These collections of his work have secured his place at the heart of the late 20th century and early 21st centuries post-concrete, graphic language poetics and satirical experiment, made utterly unique by Allen's wry, learned many-voicedness and comic brio and intense intelligence among words. He was an accomplished painter, collagist, graphic artist, and book illustrator, and many of his works and collaborations explore the graphemic and scriptural shaping of language's ideas and concepts from 5 years out on. His knowledge of Dada and its experiments not only feature in his work, notably Auto Dada Cafe, but also the sonic and sound poetry he loved and practiced. It is now over 10 years that two separate but complementary groupings would come into being and become a massive part of Allen's artistic life in Sheffield. Allen joined forces with the inimitable Martin Archer to become co-maestro of the amazing anti-choir Juxtavoices, who will be performing just after this. The sounds and turbulent, joyous, dark unfurling of his own juxtapieces are a joy to absorb in performance and as performance texts, as I hope you'll see. And the other grouping is the Centre for Poetry and Poetics here at the university. That centre invited both Allen and Geraldine to become affiliated poets. Both events, Juxtavoices and CPP, will provide a fertile pool of like-minded individuals and precious lifelong friends, many of whom are here today. His marriage and bond with Geraldine was life-changing for them both, and it is their loving relationship animated both by the entwined work as poets and by their sheer, passionate and glorious love for each other as fusional lovers in the world that made his last 25 years such a delight, textual, verbal, experiential, spatiotemporal. It's 27 years since they joined hands, forces, and hearts at Bonfires Night back in 1996. Alan Halsey. We now welcome Juxtavoices to perform two of Alan's texts.
Hi. Yeah, Juxtavoices has existed for about 12 years now. Alan and I originated the group 12 years ago, and I've had a lifetime of working with highly trained, highly skilled musicians who always knew exactly what they were going to be doing in any given musical context. But I've honestly got to say, I've had a lot more fun and a lot more joy with Alan working on the music that we make as Juxtavoices. And from the very beginning, Alan was a vital contributor to the work that we produced. Well, I used to have a special look which Alan and I would exchange, sometimes in a rehearsal, sometimes in a performance, or sometimes even when we were just planning what we were going to do next. And kind of, there were no words attached to this look, but the subtext was, how on earth did we manage to do this? And why are we doing it? Nevertheless, we kept on doing it. And the two pieces that we're going to perform this evening are, I think they're the first two pieces that Alan produced for the group. They date from our very earliest days, and they're both very different. The second one, which you'll see printed on your programme, we attempt and ultimately are doomed to fail to construct a very long word, which even to this day, I think no one in the group can actually say all the way through. But we try very hard to construct this word from its simplest elements. But the first piece that we're going to do, which is called White Persimmon, and which was read at Alan's funeral, is an incredibly simple handful of words which somehow kind of mysterious breeze blows through the words and kind of moves them around a little bit in a way that's can't really be described. So I think the best thing we can do is just perform it. So this is White Persimmon. Persimmon. Every few years, someone actually asks whether there is such a thing as white persimmon. We've never quite got to the bottom of it. I think we're not particularly bothered now whether there is or not. Stop. Alien.
Just go back to, I think it's this one.
You need to get the images.
Well, good to see everybody here. I'm Geraldine. Alan's wife. Yes, so we're here to celebrate the life of Thomas Swan and Ashley Hales. My own favourite, Mercurialis the Younger, Gargoyle, Mr. Badger, and if you prefer, Alan Halsey. I think some bright spots in Cambridge actually rumbled the Mercurialis the Younger. They couldn't find any reference to him. I think they knew that it was Alan being a bit mischievous. Were they personas or were they just pseudonyms? Probably a bit of both. The two poems I'm going to read for Alan, one is, but you'll find out why, because I realised that a lot of you couldn't get to the funeral because of the train strike. And so I haven't had time, I haven't actually seen a lot of you since Alan died. And I haven't had time, or I haven't had a chance to tell you about a few details of his last days. And these two poems are embedded in his last days. So that's what I'm going to do. And during the last, up until, he was only in hospital for about 6 days. And up until about the Tuesday, we both thought he was coming home. So the end was very quick, in fact. But during his time in hospital, he started saying to me that he'd had a visitor, that somebody was coming to see him. And I said, oh yeah, who's that then? And he said, oh, it's William Blake. And I said, oh, right. I said, well, what do you talk about? You know, he doesn't really say much. He just hangs around. Okay, right, good. So then I would say, when I went to see him, I said, well, has William been to see you? Oh, yes. I said, well, you must be on first name terms with him now. I said, you must be calling him Bill. And he said, well, I do. I said, he says, I do, unless he turns up with his wife, Catherine. He said, and when he does that, he says, I call them Wills and Kate. So we just used to giggle. That's what we did most of the time anyway. On the Wednesday, I thought he was coming home on the Tuesday, but on the Wednesday, it's quite obvious something. The infection had taken a big hold during the night. And he was like he'd run a marathon. He couldn't get his breath at all. It was quite distressing to see him. Whilst I was there, a nurse came and did one of these routine tests that they do, you know, the blood pressure and all that. And we were talking about his visitation of Blake. And I said to the young nurse, do you know William Blake at all? And she said, no. And I said, oh, you know, Tiger. No. And I said, well, you will know Jerusalem. No. I was a bit shocked, actually. I thought everybody knew for Jerusalem, but no, anyway. And then suddenly Alan, who was like sat there like that, he suddenly stopped, and in his absolutely beautiful voice, he started to recite the sick rose. O rose, thou art sick, the invisible worm that flies in the night in the howling storm, has found out thy bed of crimson joy, and his dark secret love dost thou life destroy. And that would be Alan's last poem that he would read before on this earth. And it was quite kind of like supernatural in the sense that he went back to going, I thought, how has he just done that? How has he just stopped and recited this poem flawlessly without taking a breath? It was really quite something to behold. I don't think the nurse really understood what a special moment it was, but I certainly did. And the next morning, things took a turn for the worst, and they had to put Alan on some palliative sedation. And I stayed with him during the day, and I think, apart from William Blake, I think it was only Bob that came to see him, didn't you? And we just sort of like talked to him. And but then the next day, I had to call home and get a few things from home. And luckily for me, my wonderful friend Suzanne wasn't working that day and lived around the corner, and she came and collected me, and we did this kind of breakneck circuit round to my flat, and I grabbed a few things that I needed, but I also grabbed a handful of Blake books. And so that afternoon, that Friday, I sat by his bed and I just read him Blake all afternoon. And then around about 6:10 or something, I just knew that he was leaving us. And so I put down the Blake on the bed and I cradled Alan in my arms, and he died in my arms at 6:15 on Friday the 14th of October. And it was a very, very beautiful death. I think that's something nice to keep hold of that. I couldn't have wished for a more serene and beautiful death. And he looked preternaturally beautiful. He really did. So I began to prepare for the funeral, but as the funeral got nearer, I just kept thinking there's something missing. I was waking up in the night thinking it's not right, what is missing? Something is missing. I need a little... And the funeral got closer and closer, and I just thought, I don't know what it is, but there is something really missing in this. And then I was preparing the flat for people coming round for the wake, and I was clearing things away, and I suddenly came across this poem. And this was a poem that he'd written for Aggie. Had been up to her old tricks. And can I just interject and just sort of send Aggie this kind of like swathe of love and thanks for doing all this for us. She's been absolutely brilliant. Half of it's been done while she's had pneumonia. She had pneumonia and I had this vestibular thing, and we both going, I'm going back to bed now, So we just kept crawling out of bed and doing a bit more and then crawling back into bed. So we got there. Well, you got there, really. You were the men, but thanks for everything, Aggie. But she'd gathered a few tributes for my 70th birthday, but it had been put on hold for the college magazine Blackbox Manifold. And I hadn't seen this poem. And I just came across this poem, and this poem starts, the title is Dear Geraldine, and this is it. Dear Geraldine, you asked me once to ask absent friends to send birthday presents of favourite poems. And I would, if I could, row Kathleen Ferrier home over Lethe to sing to the lute of Ben Jonson. Hast thou seen a white lily grow? Hast thou felt swan's down ever? And I immediately knew what was missing from the funeral. So the first thing I did was I contacted the funeral directors, the florists, and I said, oh, I've ordered autumnal colours for the funeral spray. I said, they have to be white lilies. They have to be white lilies. This is from the Ben Jonson, the white lilies. And am I in time to change them? Yes, of course. And then I rang the funeral director and I said, oh, can you please add me to the song list, the Kathleen Ferrier singing the Ben Jonson song. I wish we could play it now. It's absolutely beautiful, beautiful song. And they did, and suddenly I knew that the funeral was perfect. And so somehow that poem just presented itself to me. I had a day in which to get everything organised. And so there are my two poems. And I just want to finally, going back to Blake, Frances Presley, she sent me a few weeks back, she sent me some notes that she'd been going, that she'd written on our wedding day, on me and Alan's wedding day. I didn't realise she'd been going around earwigging and checking notes. I mean, what a strange person. She must be a writer or something. I didn't know who'd do that. I mean, well, Frances, obviously. Which amused me anyway. But she reminded me of something that I'd absolutely forgotten all about. And that was at the end of the night, when we'd all finished dancing and drinking and merrymaking, etc. Because actually, I forgot, it was our silver wedding anniversary on May Day, about 3 days ago. And so this reminded me of it. And at the end of just before everybody went home, me and Alan got everybody together, corralled everyone together, and we all sang a rousing chorus of Jerusalem. Of course, had to be William Blake again. So I'm hoping that maybe, who knows, if we've got time before we all go, maybe when we all get drunk, we can maybe squeeze in a rounding chorus of Jerusalem. Yeah, after the drinking and dancing finished. Maybe. Juxtavoices will be good at that. They'll be out of tune as usual. Okay, I think it's Tim Allen next.
Hello. Robin Hood book. One of the first things of Alan's I read, and I always loved Robin Hood. So I won this at Centre Parks archery competition. Robin Hood, I'm only going to read one. Robin Hood book number 22. A Saracen SAS or assassin called Nasser claims on HTV that once he had ridden with Robin Hood. The same programme also claims that Will Scapelock changed his name to Scarlet after he'd murdered his wife. But this was long before he joined the Merry Men, and in any case, he says it was Dimeno's boys set him up. He seems to connect it with some trouble at a building site on the bypass, wrecking an otherwise identified town called Loxley. He is described as angry, irritable, unreasonable, unfriendly, and unhelpful. Even his own father, he bangs down his fist, wasn't a worse bastard than Richard Coeur de Lion. We are spared an account of his drug addiction, but in unused footage, he tells how he once saw the heart of Sherwood open out and encompass the known world in a never-ending non-such glade. Instead, the film cuts from Will aiming blind and hitting bullseye to a raid on hyperbole transfigured as the business park at Clun. The sugared violence is detailed grain by grain as befits our peak viewing time. There's coverage of Marion's visionary powers, speculation on the occult meaning of the Mayday rites, and a modish take on the question, which or wise woman? But the dominant idea is that in the second period of Greenwood days, there was a second Robin Hood, not a yeoman reborn, but Huntingdon's right heir. Anthony Mundy polishes a blade and downs another pint in the darkest recess of Amos Scathelock's alehouse in Lichfield. He knows Scathelock brothers gave Huntingdon the lead. 7 years they ran wild, and he likes, as he likes to say, escaped malice before Huntingdon sprang them from Nottingham jail, and or anybody had ever heard the name Robin Hood. Lord Tennyson, who saw that strange, starched, stiff creature, Little John, kiss Kate, the same girl Mundy had always called Ginny, sits beside him. They remember the banquets in Huntington's Hall before the warman or warman, the steward, was bribed on either hand to betray him. Remember Scarlett's wife he left dead or alive for the following of Robin's dear lady? They laughed together about some of these recent stories of Robin and Marion's travels in the East. Little John's appointment as Sheriff of Nottingham, and the former sheriff's daughter's later career as Prioress of Kirklees. But of his lordship's account of the fairies' retreat north out of Sherwood, presaging the end of the Forest Games, poor Mundy looks less than convinced. Thank you.
Reading from 55 texts for the journey in Perspectives on the Reach, published in 1981 by Galloping Dog Press, which reached me in L'Aquila, Italy that year. It travels well. Abridged significantly here, you'll be relieved to know, to just 15 to keep us to time, and you can try this at home. Alan includes an epigraph from Wittgenstein, which only for this occasion I would like to preface with another, also Wittgenstein, from his remarks on Fraser's Golden Bough. Alan, this is the first English edition, translated by A.C. Miles and revised by Rush Rees, 1979. But a phrase Wittgenstein dictated to a typist and then cut from the final publication. Keeping magic out has the character of magic. So 55 texts for the journey. It was true to say that our considerations could not be scientific ones. Wittgenstein, Philosophical Investigations 1:109. They forget gods are mortals, as if the daughter could be her own mother. Then they forget about the goddess. You can't talk to their gods like reasonable men, magician to magician. You think one's like another, but there are gods you take with you and some you leave behind. also goddesses. The oldest element in Crete, her nose, looks nothing like her. The carver, of course. The wonder is we see the face at all and see it everywhere, in the lie of the land, as well as tree bark, as well as what he does with his paint pot. We sailed the great ocean and came back without proof. Sweet ghost, clown spirit, voice like a bird. It is fixing the eye. You keep watch or need watching, not worship or petition. We had seen it with the maps. You see a way through to go inside you. White crows, plains beyond the cliffs. We asked the dice for direction. Further north than men ever journeyed. We were possessed and dispossessed, poor fish, freely caught. Our dreams are simple, without blame.
Ready?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. We're going to read from Winterreisen, a book I had the pleasure of writing with Alan. In fact, writing books with Alan has been one of the greatest pleasures from poetry for me, for many reasons. I'll just state a few of them. We're going to read They Set Out from this book, Into the Arctic. For the companionship with Alan during this process of back and forth, and he was insistent, he was exuberant, he was irresistible. There was no way out. Once it began, you kept going. And there was a great deal of joy in this unrelenting wit that was at you. So I missed that. And if there are any poets out there, I have a vacancy. You may see me and, apply. So here we are. And it says in one part of this extract, that's poets talking to poets, the live and the dead. And hop, hop, said the Alan. Move on. Right, I'm being me. Adam is Alan. They set out for the pole the next morning, the fur of their parka hoods, curtains of ice. Hop, hop, said Rold, making music of the air, and the dogs bounding to the source of chill, to magnetic north of exact degree. Bones, I said. I was freezing when I was ahead.
I sometimes thought that when I was ahead, I was had. That bastard who tried to tear up the photos was probably the one who'd so carelessly entangled the rigging. Luckily, he hanged himself inadvertently, we said, and pressed on. In those days, there seemed no bounds.
His word objects drop from the air, taking their form from the sound at last to imprint themselves on the hidden ground. Hop, hop, said the Alan, setting out afresh. and the powdered snow raised their shape into the blue zero of our boundless days.
I did as I was told. Set those brittle twigs in the ice in clumsy remembrance of our three-master. We still trusted their promise of a rescue party, people who would not mistake VV for W, or much worse, M. Is memory really a red filter, not dear old sepia or cyan tone?
That's poets talking to poets, the live and the dead, yammer yammer in those empty, crowded crevices. Up there, that slow dance red blotch of fool's fire, and we see the underside of their big word, help. It opens its empty mouth at the empty sky. Our footprints, eaten as red signal memory, falls away.
And, as the words come back, sinks in its traces, which base camp took to mean we dug out of the crevasse, smashed china, cups, plates, and shards of fine glass, a treasure to some, and evidence at last of the dwellings in that most happy land. O Tarneter, O Hyperborea, O Sumeru, O, and more fools they, gulled yet again by ordinary language.
What was I meant to do? Yeah, this comes in. What do you do? God Almighty. And what they found can finally be explained. Aha. A wealth of evidence poured into her lap. The objects of a language to hand newly made. Stone tools, blades, cups, and tiny goddesses. The Arctic as the last thought of the god leaving. And look, that's a ship amidst the bergs and fog.
Where the ice is receding and nervous, grubby bears jump new sprung rivers. Looks like there's been a gamma ray burst not so many light years away, and there's iron 60 just below ground level. Then they start to bicker about words and names and territorial rights.
You could surely build an empire on this lot. Silvery white cerium, scandium and chutzpah, and that neodymium in your ear speaks my voice. Prices are indicative in our warehouses in Rotterdam, and there's no dispute over rights. See this whip hand? They fell from the sky for us to build an empire.
Landed on Earth with a bundle of handbooks to ensure the jargon would be understood. Look, here's a whole bloody library, all yours, if you don't mind soggy paper. The books float down the gullies, past the nonplussed bears. Pages flip in the current, then slowly detach.
So this is from Noughts and Quandaries. Some sections are kind of raw, and I make no apologies for that. Noughts and Quandaries. The day, the night fell out with me. I asked it how, not what to write. Geraldine, would you, I, or anyone dare call a will-o'-the-wisp a hinky punk? If so, and if he or she objected, it might be wise to say, sorry, I mixed up my vowels. I meant to say, you're a hunky punk. I mean, I mistook you for a gargoyle without gainful employment, such as a drain pipe spouting out your mouth, or as often unkindly happens, your arse. But whether you're a hinky or a hunky punk, it seems no one so far dared to say you're the etymological root of hanky-panky. To enter the blood test clinic, you must swipe the digital disc for your ticket and number. When I'd found the disc, I swiped it the wrong way. What comfort? A slight delay before my number comes up, at least in the world I still apparently inhabit. World as will and apparition. World as aperitif, in hope the main meal might be served. Idiot. The word's not when but if. Conflate being with becoming and you'll starve. I was only ill in ordinary life. I was well enough in my dream to read to a festival crowd. It was a sunless afternoon, the reading in a dusty back room, with for getaway a handy bus stop. Don't blame me that no festival crowd came to listen. I was only ill in ordinary life. It wasn't as if I needed reminding. The only reason to write was to be reminded. Did you hear about the man with the wooden face who kicked in his hammock next to my bed every night in the cancer ward? I'd see him as I shuffled post-piss back between the sheets. Flat face veiled with string netting and with comforting stick gripped in comfortable hands. By dawn he'd be gone, a tidy fellow who left nothing behind, not even a note to say thanks for the hospitality. Whether tramp or scarecrow or resident revenant, I didn't ask him or anyone except myself. The last books Nietzsche read before he lost his mind were the ones he dared publish, from beginning to end. Some days he was impressed, although on others rather less, and he worried he couldn't recall very much he'd said. But nor can all us writers. What else can we do but leave it behind, like a glad or sorry widow in case we too lose our minds? Top and tail the detail, nail it with self-denial. Pot it, shelve it, later. Devour as you ought, or repeat after me. Mirage on the wall. May an ample margin mark my fall. Thank you.
This is from Letters on Change and Exchange, Hay on Wye, 1979. 24th of May to the 4th of June. The town's relieved by the market, drying off antique with the rain. The way it changes, it drives ruin into sheepfolds. Is bleating all day where a lamb is held captive. Louder seems more near. And imagine if all the beasts went wild. Took the streets as cattle took the graveyard last Tuesday. Today we hear how women rape the men, which the newspaper omits. You get to know by the face and the posture what will be bought and what sold. As if that were the purpose, or justified division into classes. It is a growing reality, bearding the apparent as expansion of business. I attribute the strangeness to myself as to others. It is neither temper nor the Celtic, nor a flag. Habit is confused with tradition. And the living dragons reared unseen before their eyes. We change, but the river stays the same. And the bridge is as ugly as the last time you saw it. I am shot through with film bagged by tourists. There are fewer gods than churches, new tea shops, more antiques, fewer pubs. The town's without myth except bargains, several burnings of the castle and the hanging of Armstrong, the poisoner. the house now possessed by police. It is waiting, seeing what will turn up, even sunshine or good air, as every day vacancies unfilled. The mountains deal clouds, and the clouds deal with mountains. The border, if anything, contracts with the sea. Local power is dominance of names, claiming kin, exchanging confidence with land. Small business. The small woman's briefcase seemed a warning, but with you it's all edge, distinguishing the Vandal from the Gothic tearing flowers. It's equally Saxon and the Celt forcing language. You are not being showing off in the streets, says a mother. So denying our thinking alike, not being showing off the streets, but breaking the world in syntax. 2. A change of ground. June. Strong points were set up, which petrified the grove. It was instantly law and the urban, the limited, with good tin baths in the cellars, causing jokes about the Welsh. The church became landlord, not acknowledging secular distinctions. Only later was excluded from the walls, and thoroughbreds let loose on the motte before auction. Cash pays for annual revenge as for fish ponds and otters. Twists in the friendship, in the rural, thus uniting the enemy. Period of raids on the parish every Sunday. Of any man's right to a seat and a name in the kingdom. Eventually, capital and Godhead fall as one. But the zodiacal change is as yet unnoticed. The church is rebuilt, and the Bull Ring, Bear Street, and the Old Black Lion, they still offer consolation. If I heard it right, it was the hub of the universe, or what you've been used to. Young rock, red sandstone with new evidence of fireworks. The memories trial, an execution after murder, and a bitch on prosperity, so shopkeepers stand in their doors in late spring. Hope the thunder will break. You soon see yourself in that light, and listen to old men. Was in haulage bringing down sticks from the mountains, meaning whole trees chained to the wagon. And how rats ran hell roads in the carcasses of pigs in the glebe in those days. This is local detail, in little, in separate confidings.
I read from An Alphabet of Emblems, which Turn Press put out in 1987. It's been reproduced a couple of times since. What souls are these but the antibodies gathered in Mount Purgatory's newfound antipodes? Being entered as a plea, being altered in perpetual adjournment or perpetual alert. Dead quick past the chapels, due north and a harsh salvation, rigor mortis and tenor of a foursquare temporal possession. Mark the difference in scrap, spruced out at that point on the scarp where meaning becomes profit, cheap timber. Empire transfixed and reviewed in a single and simple figure. This revenant is Psyche. Pray, pray, nothing twice, removed from a paradise, whose fall proved no fall, flesh not foul, not to fall. Such a practical achievement of patriarchal order as gravity is foxed. Oh, pressures of dark days, the precious tale in the gravy. Horace on azure, horizon assured. Finding myself out on the discarded index I'll call Europe, that's the trick, and that's a fact. Here's my hand. Stations reel between the trains, still on time. Infinite jinxes of demonstrable number strip sense to a T denoting time, or that beast which this possible world made of anything at all. The sunboat crosses Lethe, but you notice that everything close in the dream begins, but the sunboat crosses Lethe. Dear memory, don't wait, don't want, but go anywhere. With random access, go back to the bank. No straightaway souls take flight than over Norway, perhaps nowhere, more narrow than the nerve. One summons up, one goes down. Then Coriolanus, cares of state in double times, caress the hand that pecking order fears order. The bearer's promise will become your demand, just as the self-styled look of the lookalike identifies the reverent, repaid and yet tricked, like the end in itself, out of time and mind. Minds multiplied by questions, simple figures on the carpet, like the towers of Bibles or any books at all events piled up. Virtually the image just behind the mind's eye, something, everything, reticence, includes, as if anything does. Weighed with care, up and down is the same way, the scale if it strays like a river stays human. A tract of country stretches out before them like a treatise, beyond human understanding exhumed. Oceano securer, but a shade more or less secure than ocean. Secura umbris, or England's umbrella. For whom no one but voices in reverse order. The way we see, we never see the way leading over the edge of our word is bondage. Times, days off on the centuries off days, causing more fights and incident excursions. Here an isolated, unsunny, woe-betide estuary, abridged in Heraclitus and by Watts unsung. Years of a comparable moment furnish seconds, then squared in a parable of light, and then finish. As in Zeno, it differs and differs. Subscripts array, volunteers in a row.
Just one poem, not two. And this one comes from last year's Remarks of Uncertain Consequence, published by Glenn at the Five Seasons. Scientific choice of poem because it mentions another Shearsman author, and also because it mentions pangolins, and I've always wanted one. Lee Harwood had a thing about pangolins, although he told me once he'd only seen one stuffed in the Brighton Museum he worked in at the time as an attendant. Whether Marianne Moore met one's unsure. She said she took some of her description from Pangolins, an article by Robert T. Hart in Natural History, itself a museum piece. Perhaps she came face to face with one in the Bronx Zoo, but in that case, would she have called it, however amusingly, this near artichoke? Better that she exalts the pangolin's part in the splendor which man in all his vileness cannot set aside. Nowadays, and any time you choose, you can watch one on YouTube.
turning his or her head left and right with what looks like a smile. He or she is penned up in a Chinese market and up for auction as either top price meat or an aphrodisiac, if not the elixir of life. Top price because there aren't so many pangolins around in the 21st century. On YouTube, because they're possibly carriers of COVID-19.
Some snippets from Table Talk, which was published privately for the new year 1989. The poem looks the other way, just as one word impersonates the first thing the last thing it means will reward it for. This isn't William Blake. The cutworm ploughed back shares the profit. This might be Martial. It is this and this, then it's years ago. It's what you say you said you side with, and what you make it up with, you make up, then play down. At least I do, Catullus. Passing the world stuff, I call my baby my sugar, sings Billy to Thales, who turns to Laureen, who sticks to what she says, come hell or high abstract fiction, Wallace Stevens springs on.
Sorry, Harry. It's my alarm to tell me to take my drugs.
Well, we all need to take our drugs.
Yeah.
Can I share?
Sorry. Yeah, I've got some spare.
Great. I've been faithful to thee even now when everything's post something. A US Army manual quotes Dowson and scenarios the word. Time past well is still well past time. If you'll hear what I believe, I'll believe what you hear, so that even if talks continue, we're uncertain witnesses for sure. And this is from Reasonable Distance, published by Equipage in 1992. Summer 1990, an eclogue. Thyrsis bids again and again bids adieu. Inside the garden are renegades waiting for a second hand grenade to let fly in the ornament where echo meets a match in a logical but still not predictable finale. Narcissus, with a farewell speech in his pocket, crosses Rubicon Way in Progress Park, Luton, which nobody should doubt exists. An echo of momentary monetary union starts a little rumpus during dog days nights when cliques come to heel in high places, or let's call it the greenhouse for effect, or a small consideration above and below. Defences let drop like a word in Echo's ear of favour in the folly, mere defiance, ref the slogan, Luton's looking up. To what's not the question, but the second owl's answer might be Echo in person, causing wholesale confusion of the realm. A land whose saving grace turns waste paper into trees, says the note signed N in litter at the gates of Bedlam without mercy. Night looks so modern and recherche with its back to nature and the interstellar gap where placemen tease topographical allusion to death's door. In the transplant centre to the left of the heartland, let bygones be goodbyes, repeats Thyrsis. Goodbye.
follow-up to Dan's piece that you read earlier from The Art of Memory in Hay on Wye, not the edition stated on the leaflet, but the second edition, expanded, no published in 1996, and this is a contracted version that I'll read. I came in crepusculo to the Hay, September 77. The town was particularly grey that autumn and winter. Cloud, mist, drizzle, mist. Grey, damp, trapped between mountain and river. One morning in November, the mist had thickened into fog. I walked up St. Mary's Road, along Church Street, Castle Street. There was a smoky smell about. The previous night, there'd been a fire in the castle. That was the most recent burning. I came in crepusculo. The town, said Anne Stevenson, is full of people who've limped this far and don't have the strength to limp any further. Speech, speech. This burning is a speech act. Books are damaged less by fire than by water. The Tudor section of the castle was left roofless and windowless. The Norman section was already a ruin. Almost totally decayed, it is undamaged. After passing over Wye River, the which for lack of good knowing in me of the ford did sore trouble my horse, I came in crepusculo to the Hay. Higher Anglicana, higher Wallensis, a border town, but the question is really what it borders on. This map is bloody mad. There weren't 7 stone arches, there were 5. There is no evidence of Roman occupation on the Brecknockshire bank of the Wye. Considered as a speech act, Hay on Wye is a constant digression. Half a glass of water, half a glass of sand, straight from the tap, 1980. Time is concentered in the clock. Space defined by a wall they breached long ago as the town spread west. I came to Hay in 1977. Anywhere you go, you'll find a field or whatever called World's End. Is it here that, no, it wasn't, was it? The drawing of the gallows, if you cannot read writing or write reading, means post haste. The most talked about topics in Hay on Wye in the week beginning 5th of June 1995 are Mr. L.K. Morelli's rumoured intention to demolish the wall in front of the old cinema bookshop without planning permission, and Mr. A.L. Halsey's haircut. Halsey fails in Hay. Alan Halsey, who has led the fight against extending the car park into K-Moor, polled 254 votes to finish last of the 11 candidates seeking 10 seats on the town council in the community council elections.
Like so much of Alan's work, much of which you've just heard, this little set of 4 poems, 1 poem, is both quicksilver and incredibly dense. I find it most helpful to read it in the context it's given in Marginalian. It's the first of the opening group of poems, which all have kind of layered and interlinked lexis, allusions, and concepts, which I have nowhere near mastered. The emblems that Alan Fisher just read as well are really kind of imbricated in all of this too. Same many of the similar concerns, especially, I would say, still on time. Anyway, clearly there's an overall reference to the ancient philosophers of Elea, in this case, such as Zeno, he of the arrow, and Parmenides. With this particular set that I'll read at the more kind of gore-blimey level, I find myself thinking of the alarm clock and of an air raid, also the air raid warning. So I just wanted to take the liberty of prefacing this attempt at a reading, Eleatic alert, with the last line and a half from an Eleatic dirge for William Empson, albeit itself wriggling with ambiguity. Isn't all time lost by definition? Whatever it is in this context, isn't all time lost by definition? It points back along the flight path, refashioned. So, Eleatic alert. Light-fingered dawn, an hour late, accounts for the delay he imagines. To annihilate its trace is the daily task of the hero's mind as it returns to his body between points of fixed abode on the image of the virtual horizon. Whatever your time zone, smile and place your facsimile slide in the slot marked quick or you're dead. It is a quirk of nature with nuisance value added to Renaissance wonder you realize the moment you press and release. Another homophone strays off in unmeasured stress and indivisible despair. By the sound of it, a levy of airmen back from Lethe or W.H. Auden is strafing the word horde, hit and promise rebound. At enemy base, the one and the many will and won't disappear. Repeating at speed all night, the message is denied, recoded, and returned. The radar ensures that the reader, deciphered and in that sense foresuffered, will sleep undisturbed. His dreams have been distributed as type, as a sidelight signals to a minus factor, over plus delight. Sing or else.
For the first round of the readings. This was absolutely amazing. Thank you also for to Juxtavoices and to Adam and Geraldine for the introductions. Can't believe we've got to the interval or break, but we have. So we need to be rather kind of strictish. I would say we are back at no later than 10 to, because we've got a lot to get.
Can you let people know that these are the things I just talk? And
why don't
they are these? I put out for anyone who wants them, and grab some more if there's any around. Yeah.
So
9
minutes we've got.
There are some Juxtavoices CDs on the store which are free. They're our gift for the
No energy. Thanks, Alex. I know I can rely on you. Okay, now that Harriet has finished praying, we can continue with the second half. We'll try and be very sort of short and sweet with the next few readings. So, dear poets, please stick to the time. Just wanted to say three things. This is rather unfortunate. I mean, we are trying to pack everything in tonight, but I'm hoping there will be a little time left for David and you to continue the exchange. But it would be good if our poets who sign up for dinner could start thinking about leaving at about 1:45. This is going to be rather impossible, but if we could aim to be there, at least the majority of us by 9, that would be awesome. And it's literally a 2-minute walk. So I will be leaving with whoever wants to get going, and Adam, and then follow Adam, and well, a lot of you will know where we're going. The other thing I wanted to say is that obviously you might have noticed that there are these absolutely amazing and stunning images in the background that was put together by Adam, Piette. These are all Alan's visuals, obviously. The work we've chosen from the titles of the pieces are on your program and the final little paragraph. And also wanted to say a huge thank you to Glenn, who bibliographically tidied up the list of the text that
with some mistakes.
With some mistakes. So we try to be as accurate as possible for Alan here, but I'm sure we've left some errors in there. Apologies about that. I'm going to read 3 short poems, and I've chosen, because of the title for tonight's reading, is sort of following that idea, and I'm reading from the Shearsman's Selected, and from the sequence on A Looking Glass for Logoclast. A Logoclast lost weekend. A live ideal dead, vademecum or linger, singer, disappointments, only one of the reasons to feel discouraged. He wrote against that is he opposed both manner and matter and expressed as much in the margin. Another showed adequate charisma, but it was, after all, October. Just as limousines to limestone are but vacuums to a beach, the wide sum denoting misprinted wisdom is less roused than Rousseau'd. Just as also end without less love, his dearest said, your prodigious knowledge of books is incidental. Egyptian arrangements, and this was in memory of Bill Griffiths. If you give up writing, they'll have you in handcuffs, digging roads. A man made a golem wife fairer than fair. Ocean fell in love with, asked the Caesar to catch one lock of her hair, which the scribes told the king, and so the king had her sent for. Don't write with your elbows, don't make words worse than they are. One day the Lord Chancellor will shudder. He'll sew up his desk and best table to build himself a hovel to hide in. Wake up, Judge, wake up. The lion had learned a good lesson. It didn't need a hippo whip to teach him. That's why his name is remembered. Don't rewrite old verses with your elbows. Go and find yourself some unknown words. When the chiefest crocodiles gobbled all the cyclists and joggers, what he'll want for pudding is a sort of information no one's ever had. Wake up, Judge, wake up. These are cheerful songs, said the tree, cheerful as bread and the baker. Let's give every one of them 1,000,000 jubilees and the choice of castles to live in. When right's as much out as iniquity's in, unless you find yourself some unknown words, they'll have you in handcuffs, digging roads. The ship sailed north 2 months with a cargo of giraffes and mascara, and when it reached the residence, we were as little as boys again. Then, after we died, sailed west. Notes by Alan, reworked texts randomly selected from Adolf Ehrman's anthology, The Literature of the Ancient Egyptians. Bill wanted to buy my copy long ago. Sorry, Bill. I hope you did find another one. A Logoclast Lost Sonnet is my final choice. I nearly didn't get here. I was looking for the telcare room in the floor chart foundation, and the next thing I knew, I was in Morocco. Then I couldn't find the tutorial explaining the instructions to the site map. Open Sesame, I tried it, no go, and no guesses what it costs to take the river taxi back over Lethe.
This is Visions of the Western Railways. 1. If you are keeping 1,500 out of, say, 6,000 books, which ones do you keep and why? 2. If you keep books you think you might not find again, which isn't true of most books, nevertheless, why? 3. Let us suppose anyone would keep a book in black cloth, spine-lettered gilt, The Pursuit of Death, floral motif, Kurtz. 4. Various disbound Byron pamphlets for their nakedness. Also Churchill and Pope. Even Whitehead's Honour, a satire. Manners, a satire. 5. Books published when poetry was made wide-leaded. Romantics still wrote for such a spacious line. Check compositional changes after, say, 1820. The effect of the cramping of text in Victorian editions. After Anderson's poets. 6. Do not keep Anderson's poets, although it includes many poets rarely again reprinted, partly because it wants too much shelf room, and the leather on this set has rotted. But even so, you wouldn't disbind it, or would you? 7. The poetry you keep is in any case what you remember and revise in your memory. So what use books when the answer to textualism is as clear as that? 8. If for reference, then with reference to what? 9. If you keep both Captain Thompson's and Margoliouth's Marvell, what kind of love is that? 10. Various Chattertons. You might never read Bowles's sonnets, but isn't this pair, even in the 8th edition, a pretty thing? 11. What hasn't to do with literary criticism? What kind of aesthete are you to think it? 12. Richard Owen Cambridge's Scriblariad for its engravings. Some poetry is worth whatever it inspired an engraver to do. 13. Too many Miltons doesn't mean ditching a Bentley. 14. Sir Kenelm Digby's 2 treatises, in the one of which the nature of bodies, in the other the nature of man's soul, is looked into, in way of discovery of the immortality of reasonable souls, because it feels as if it must be poetry, if not in name. 15. The Chaucer of probably 1561, lacking title, but with spider doodles and dearest our initials G and A. 16. A couple of emblem books, even as the binder's gilt says Quals and a tiny Pia Desideria, although you'll never read Latin again, Blake's graphic work and the emblematic tradition, because you tried writing emblems once. 17. The Garland facsimile Shelley's, the masterpiece of language writing. 18. Some bibliographies, including Foxon, for all the disbound pamphlets you'll never own. 19. Ulysses, 5 or 6 editions, including for his witty name, the Gabler. Finnegan's Wake and its recensions, umpteen Beckett and Wittgenstein, the cantos in separate and collected editions, Antil and the treatise on harmony, effectively retitled in black ink to certify that E. Swainson, having bought same, refused 10 francs reimbursement. The author's increased esteem, E. Pound, 1926. 20. Various contemporaries, particularly my wife. 21. Pamphlets, Bill Griffiths handmade. Books you see across a room were designed by Glenn Storehouse. 22. The Dawn in Britain in 6 volumes, more readable, wide-leaded. 23. Folios such as Sandys Ovid and most elegant and elegant of all the 1718 prior. 24. The landscape for its typeface. Christabel with the pencil inscription, folly, folly, all is folly. 25. Dodsley's poems, Percy's relics, the more legible of Gay's poems in quarto, Oxford English texts, preferably before they grade in offset. 26. Friends and best enemies. 27. For the title on its spine alone, and why not? Visions of the Western Railways, 1838.
Some excellent scales, perhaps, from Lizard Abstract. It, or let's say he, lives among the common lizards. He is 4 or 5 inches long, and his head and tail are like theirs. But his skin is silvery bronze, and the middle part of his body, between fore and hind legs, is circular and nearly flat, about the size of an old penny. As he rests in the sunlight, yellow gold circles glint on his skin. He scuttles into a crevice. As usual, I'm caught between attraction and repulsion. The lizard earth will never be mine. As usual, I reach for symbol, think of alchemy, etc. The lure of the once seen, romanticism, death. The philosopher's stone was presumably round like any other circle of thought, perfect and perfectly trapped in its beginning. I'm 5 years old. My mother has run my bath and told me to get in. The water is clouded by bath salts. I'm convinced I've seen a beetle in the water. He's about 6 inches long, shiny black. His body is circular and he has a single pointed horn. He's the unicorn beetle. I stand at the end of the bath and scream. There is a terrible continuity in things. I find a letter from Ian Sinclair, dated 28th of November 72, quote, to push back into darker fields, mythology, ancestor worship, death presences. The hunchback, wrote Yeats, is his own body of fate, and the passionate body is the sum of those daemons. The communicators often scribbled it on margins or on scraps of paper without relation to the text. As the dream lizard rests in the sunlight, the yellow gold circles turn pink, little dome-like blisters or the heads of shiny pins on his skin. He scuttles into a crevice. I am ill in bed. About 8 years old, I'm reading an encyclopedia of natural history, which I think belonged to my father when he was a boy. I return again and again to the section about crocodiles and alligators. The pages have a dull sheen, the pictures are grey and blurred. Iguanas, iguanodons, the great prehistoric lizards, our particular devils, our next best thing to mythology. Those dragons which have always lived just off the margin, scribbled beyond bounds, in the crevice between page and page of my father's book. Scraps, scribbled, script, scuttled, daemons, diamond. Suppose for a moment that the watery eyes of Frankenstein's monster were the eyes of a lizard. Would the story stop there? The first draft read, as usual, you were caught between attraction and repulsion. The lizard earth will never be yours. As usual, you reach for a symbol. There is always that transference, the usual pushing away from first to second person. Even now, I want to say this is a textual remark, a textual form of blood sacrifice, the relatively uncommon occurrence of the letter Z, lizard. In a draft of The Triumph of Life, sacrifice. of sanguine fire.
I'm going to read one poem. This is Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Ill-written scratch, but your heart with joy, much more and much more, to have the poem. When half of me has vanished, being carried from this bed to the sofa in panic, and such hideous shadows even opium won't do. Papa prays with my hands held in his. I'm surprised. I'm ready to believe. I feel you teach me. You speak. Only do not blame me. I never thought, dearest, anyone I love would love me. And to write such words as, forgive me, I am married. Write the Browning, very plain, and the Casa Guidi, these windows, 8 sofas, a panini, and a Robert. Do you know, I once wrote some sonnets about you, kept safe as my me that I did not sacrifice. Hankering for solitude, perhaps melancholy calms. Between 5,000 and 7,000 lines here in blots, and omissions will happen. The veil is thin, and the messages. The natural world is the vague rag and shadow. I feel I foreboded. Thank you.
I'll read some pieces which particularly reflect conversation with Alan over the years. This is part of the text which Alan wrote for the opening of our book, Days of 49. Bardo Panavision, 1949. The first thing I noticed were these women smoking in the streets, a dull white light. The recent accounts of rioting in London at political meetings, and increasing misuse of words such as alibi, merchandise, hostess, fantastic, meat made from molasses called tarula, reporters reporting third person, a dull pea-green light, thin, they like to say, as vitamins, modern art, etc. 3 white horses for Tristan Fu, hides stripped down to the brickwork, phantom fungi, astral equipment of Glasgow and Dundee, a dull yellow light, their mutual dislike of the poet Dylan Thomas and the critic Geoffrey Grigson. Conflict even when a man lights his cigarette from another's. Craps at Monte Carlo, an expression such as wireless gazing. Modern art, said de Chirico, is based on a lack of control and inability to produce great paintings. It resembles a Two Cities film, with crucifixes set before the beehives and a half-destroyed city with Sartre in the bookshops. US airmen and Marines have landed, and the women stand on the rocks and shout the usual sad things against the clatter of 2-stroke engines. Tough men stropped, keen, you can tell in the dark by the smell of liniment, sit amidst the bric-a-brac in the seaman's mission, while the black balloon flies above the sorting sheds. Red china on the one side, and these tin Union Jacks on the other. Smoke of V3 rockets, fire pole birds from the womb of death in the vineyards. Doctor on a 90-hour week, not cribbing. That the Holy Father has placed a ban on modern decadent art, or the Madonna and Child of Mr. Henry Moore. Opaque gauze walls, the rocking chairs, endlessly the matchboard cylinder or wall of death. Measures aimed at destruction of the nymph, hormones of hers injected in the toad. If it lays, she's pregnant. Honest, un-American obsession. New Rainbow Corner Milk Bar. Wintering in Cannes, the once Emperor of Vietnam, and with Muslim coach Rita Hayworth. Might learn scat or spit gypsy, the most happy realm. Never was a time when so little was known. William Blake. My Kates mark X, but these names being equal, for I do not allow that there is such a thing as superstition. There is innocence, and at the top of the staircase, angry, scaly, speckled visions and shadows. While Mr. Blake worked for a despicable sum at the Night Thoughts, but at Felpham, more distinctly, a fairy procession, an immense poem I am secretary to, and a very unwarrantable warrant for seditious words. I am become suddenly what I was at first. I again display my giants to the public in minute particulars, having written 6 or 7 epics longer than Homer's, instructed in dreams by the man I drew for Mr. Varley, that everything seen is determinate, as the celebrated city of Golgonooza. The copper, how lovely by the lamplight, strained through the tissue, Milton was saying, and you, if you choose, might have, if you would, but I intend to bring only my drawings from Dante. I am too much attached to think much of anything else. Caroline Norton. Beauty never wearied out, so surrounded by malice. Norton will ask me who I am, and the perpetual struggle to be and do. You can't think how I reproach myself, so abandoned and somehow impossible to fit or bind up. If my children are kept from me, all else is trivial. All that comfortable flattery respecting the dream, all the fugitive ghosts make a cipher of me that I used to keep.
Alan was also a translator, and Marshall chose him to be his translator. This is book 1, poem 61. There's no escape.
You will see it whenever you walk out of the station. It sets an enormous sans serif script on the wall of a 10-story building. It said that Sheffield paid Motion an unspeakable number of £1,000 for one of the world's worst poems. Book 1, 107. A moderately successful, nasty little man whose short and glib epigrams and glaring want of taste. Thank you, Professor. I didn't really want to be your poet in residence. I just fancied some leisure. Book 2, Poem 1. Dear reader, I'm back. You may be surprised I'm still at it, but consider 1, epigrams save trees, as well as 2, secretary's fees, and 3, aren't quite long enough to bore you silly, even though 4, you may think I've written too many. Book 2, number 19. Thank you, Zolo, for the invitation. I needed a dinner, but what can I say? I should have gone down to the food bank. Book 4, number 10. Here's a copy of my latest, written as usual for my personal pleasure. It's fine by me if you use it to practice postmodern erasure. Book 6, number 60. When you find your books in a charity shop with creases at the spine and notes in the margins. Pretentious, disgusting, tedious, obscure, that you think your poems are worth writing. Book 10, number 21. Dead right, Sextus. Deleuze and Adorno would love your poems. Why not try prose? And finally, this is book 11, number 15. Some of my poems could be read to the Stoic branch of the WI. The ones I like best joke and stink of bars and whores' handbags. But it's a personal preference. Judge the poem reader, not the poet.
Oh. 43 years working with dear Alan on so many glorious projects and productions. Thank you, dear Alan. The very first little thing from 5 Seasons, letterpress days, in sight of Carnliddy, 1979, with a lovely brush drawing by Alan. Carnal dye, saint's eye cast over castellated sky, windy head watched on sea rack wreck for spoiler skull stranger. Saints laugh, stone teeth to the gale, whom the tide rip tempts, time strips to the mound, mist ghosts lids down. Stone stack odds saints lay on sky's order, against ancient random, sure balancing of rock. And Alan responded to that, it was the beginning of our collaborations, with this extraordinary production, which I'm so delighted to show you and show Geraldine later. It's an edition of 1. Alan typed out 23 poems, some of them fairly long, on his typewriter, all clean sheets from the typewriter, stapled them together with a label on the front saying some poems typed in an edition of one for Glenn, Liz and Finn Storhogue, Friday, 18th of October, 1979. So it's quite precious. And I'm going to read one short poem from it, and I've never seen it published elsewhere, so I'd be very interested if anyone in this learned assembly has come across this poem elsewhere. And it's a tribute to Alan as calligrapher and brushwork artist. The calligraphy of Madman Chang. It was the wine did it, grass script of running water where a fly danced, splash, it is the life in it. Fly wrist of this immortal's maturely glanced brush, there is no why of it. Idea writ as soon as thought, oh, certainly chanced, yes. And then a delight a few years later, such fun to produce another loop in our days. This is the special edition, and such fun to set in metal type what must be Alan's thinnest poem. Hay in the first line is hay on Y, of course. November song. Nice margins. Hay, haze again. The early day as it resolves into the days, now winding, it is true, as a wind into winter. Only the last line has 2 syllables. And I'm only going to read 3 lines from a poem in this book, just because it's such a nice book. It's such fun to do. This is a special edition of Auto Dada Cafe, and I'm just reading the first 3 lines of 5 accounts of the arrest of English poetry. In the darkest heart of the syndrome, we are waiting for a mark and a sign. English poetry is in there somewhere and nervous. And then I'm just going to finish with a short poem from the last book, which I worked on with Alan quite a lot of the time when he was in hospital, not the hospital right at the end, which Geraldine was so movingly describing, but when he was in hospital about a year earlier. And I'll try to read this without collapsing. He kept bad company in later years, hung out with Marshall, rifled Shakespeare's bawdy, in low comedy revelled, considering shit the symbol of his era, and truth a compendium of error. He never quite settled, but rarely travelled, sat by his window and slowly unravelled.
Greenhouse effects, a calendar. January, concerning strategy. If it's only a sort of umbrella inside the umbrella, we can rest assured any metaphor will do. February. In politics, murder is committed. To what is the question? Everyday spirits gather round every letter's delay, every day. March. Nobody keeps a reasonable distance in one place for long. Nobody steps on a mine of information twice. April. Where anxiety is the boost, there's no way to bust except up. Then doubt reposes, you reckon? Then doubts repossess. May, e.g., e.g. ABC and the rest, but won't the satire running backwards in veritas trouble you when exequies said? June. That never enough but always too much is one way of keeping up and the peace. Just as anyone's advantage is everyone's, saying the same thing to no one at once. July. What colour of brags that future you see red to an unpaid bill? What's one more pitfall to a riddled earth? What colour of letters this day the due dates back to or into? August. Whoever claims the world, the apostrophes taken possession of the word land. September. When there's a better nature second at best, but human to refer to, it's forgotten, as a rule game said. It made up for that once, for fun and for all. Even so. October. Stunned and white, the meta-phosphorescence of the phonemes is the nemesis they serve in thematic personation. Or the names overheat with intent, calling mouth and market to account. November. All said and half done, as if words in a mess need enemies out here in the wind and the wrong. Fate accomplished so much on the screen, and the rebound that by that you're pledged. December. Anything I'm in hopes to see answers back to front, in effect, in the greenhouse, neither to mirror nor not to confront you too.
Beginning to end. An apocryphal apostrophe to the apothecary Aphrodite, an apparition, an apotheosis, an athematic analogy to anything. An A. Be summed up, be multiplied, but better not be somebody's second best besom, beswept. C, saw, A, and B. C's not saw, C's certain it's curtains for A and B. D was a delta for angels. Don't dither with D. And whatever you do, don't deconstruct. Ecstatic in Ecbatan was some message, but to send it to England, a mistake. Fun for all meant fun for all, fair and fervent flags unfurl, festivalitude to denarians. I knew it would get me. Farewell. God, a gruesome giant. Forget you said it if you get to meet him in a foregone conclusion. For Gog is and was a great, fierce giant, as giants go. Hiwat, silence. I too was initially in Italy. Eyes, an imitator, eyes all inside out. Jeopardy is my game, said the poacher in pursuit of a party-coloured moocher, often seen hereabouts by any other name, a joke panther. Kay, when we last saw him, was in serious trouble. Critics had his number. He pointed out the house of pure reason, less than a kilometre away. Lambast, not bombast. Charles Lamb could tell you, but the lambs who lie down with puns very often become loin chops. Mark, name, read, make, mean, damn, dark, dank, mandrake. Novel me no novels, number me no number none. Ossian invented Macpherson, only to show that he, Ossian, was no objective, correlative, ordinary ghost. Petals and leaves differ. Petals are rarely found in books, whereas leaves always are. Also, petal endears. Leaf, although a fine old word, does not. Questions abound. Inquisitors nowadays are everywhere, commoner than inkwells. Rosicrucians transplanted the Rosamunde in a retrograde position in the King James Version. Discuss. Spirits of the letters, sprites of the spits of facts. It takes trash to detract from, or trash it takes thanks from to detract. Unlikely ukulele ululation. For unexplained absence. World as will. Would anyone wish it? Xenophanes, hexameters, vex, lexicons extremely. You think an alphabet tells you nothing? Is that why it runs on in your head year after year? And why you hope it stops at you? It stops at nothing, is why it won't even stop at double you. Z in response pulls the plugs.
No, that's the.
140.
I have to.
1640.
And I have to include these guys.
No, it was there.
I know. I have to include these guys there. Yeah. Well, I just.
Oh, no, not
Yeah.
already. When you are ready. Oh, God.
Well, I didn't know that.
1640.
You were going to ask me to say something about the A to Z machine.
Yeah.
That's all prepared. The A to Z machine is that little graphic which we've used for the advert, just reading. It actually consists of an extraordinary A to Z design that Geraldine and I found in a church in Goza on the floor. You walk over the alphabet, extraordinary fantastic photograph of that. The thing on top is a wrecked a satellite dish, which probably won't transmit, which is probably why it's called the poetry track, the A to Z transmitter, because you ain't going to get much from it. But you do get this very lovely A to Z design. So, yeah, fair enough. We are the A to Z machine.
Sorry to interrupt, but you said it's a self-portrait.
Oh yeah, well that's another thing. Yeah. I've forgotten that. It is a self-portrait. Yeah. I am an A to Z machine. Why not? So I'm going to read from an unpublished and probably unfinishable book, which I've been writing about 10 years. And it's called Remarks of Uncertain Consequence. What I'm going to do is I'll read the selection. It's a very small part of the book, but it's selected from various parts of it. I'm going to read the selection straight through as if it were a sequence of self-standing poems. Although in the book, they appear within a much larger network, which cross-references from one to the other, ideas, themes, allusions, historical cruxes, bits of memoir, anecdotes, and what have you. So it's become a kind of labyrinth, which I'm getting to the point where I can't find my way around it either. So when I completely lose myself in it, then that's probably done. It has an epigraph from Ernst Gellner. The conflation and confusion of aims and criteria is the normal and original condition of mankind. The element is as liminal does. That's not a title, that's a one-line poem. Very, very few of these poems do have titles. A sea of wiseacres, holy day of ambiguities, it's for the commercy's sake of them that speak leasing, Psalm 5, verse 6, we've been saved. One reads in order to ask questions. That's Kafka. Query the pronoun. Lost among these entirely strange people. Yea, though I walk in the shadow of the German dentists in Lanzarote, I'll remember Zarathustra and laugh and sing and fear no categorical imperatives. Send him to Coney Hatch, Voltaire's said to have said about this or that theologian. A good idea, but Coney Hatch didn't open as a madhouse until the year of the Great Exhibition. I've searched and searched, but have yet to discover why Coney Hatch had such a reputation as to land this development. I did find a photo captioned renovated building in use as flats, 2008. The watchtower with cupola atop, very 19th century, so post-Voltaire. But consider also that care in the community enabled this latest change of use. Voltaire would sit down on the verge of the North Circular and weep to think of so many theologians let loose. Like a deal of old codes that has nothing to do but idles away time in reading or pottering about a garden. Do you see me? You're listening to the sponge merchant's tale, as Mayhew told it. I do believe people read themselves silly. He would talk away stunning. That a soul must have a soul, and the soul's soul a soul. The living dead souls of Egypt in infinite regression. Before anyone looked at souls, pictured coming forth by day, and saw they were harpies. What a loss to religion, when God's buttocks and underlings' refusal to drink piss and eat shit were no longer considered scriptural topics. When snakes grew legs, when crocodiles could talk, when sky meant the safest of places and men become swallows sported round the heads of friendly golden baboons. When an eggshell had two spirits, one to guard it before and one after it was cracked, so that every eggshell was two eggshells. Footnotes to poems tend to ramble in much the same way the ghosts of the Napoleonic Wars kept shuffling about in the 20th century. In 1950s playgrounds, Boney was still as big a Boney as Hitler, despite the testicular song to the tune of the Colonel, which in 51 was the first ever sung by a computer. Boney, whose familiar ghost was like Julius Caesar's Alexander the Great. Time's a river which flows backwards in footnotes and underworld. Tell that to Heraclitus, all the Marines as English sailors, mainly men press-ganged to fight Boney, like to say. Although reigns of 60 and more years are a topic these days, no one seems to remember much about George III, except that he lost the American colonies and then his mind. It's said George III looked kindly on that failed assassin who was bound for Bedlam because he foresaw that a straitjacket also awaited him. And while, or perhaps because, the slant of his forehead shown by Gilray suggests something missing, it seems George III even thought he meant well by going out eyeballing peasants. He probably did pinch as many pennies as Peter Pindar could tongue twist in rhyme, but despite the fancy of a king's two bodies, one or both in his case satirically buggered, I doubt he expected so to resurrect as to justify the right to always pack a gun. You must have met him more than once in William Blake's prophecies, the liberty of Wilkes and Paine's common sense, and where would we be without that trio? But allowing that it was an age frantic as ours for news and comment as constantly repeated as annoying quirks of speech, and not forgetting the quarrels of the foxes and the pits, it's still a puzzle why a king should be so often depicted surprised at stool as Farmer George. Perhaps in those privy moments he saw himself manuring his kingdom, and so let's hope that in his purposeless visions of futurity, the cause of his indisposition wasn't GM crops. Booksellers loved him. His legacies mostly in the BL and BM. Notes towards a poem for Paul Merchant. Those years I spent driving around England because every small town had 2 or 3 second-hand bookshops with a chance of a sniff. I was always in two minds, one a memorized road map and the other enhancing the map with an added dimension I wouldn't pretend I could describe, but presenting a land part seed, part imagined, inhabited by unidentified beasts and not entirely human men and women, I tried later to picture so flagrantly out of perspective as to disturb some sensitive souls. Now I think again of Mercator, recovering the earth from the charms of the Mappae Mundi, but seeing it still from the lowlands. That centre, even now, of but a little to the west, as we see it from here, our familiar projection. It could have been another way, but at the time, not much. Mercator's pen pal D had already envisaged the British Empire and reclamation at last of the once and future king's far-flung domains, now reduced to the relics I'd either seen or imagined when driving around England. Dear Paul, I'm writing a book called Remarks of Uncertain Consequence, so perhaps in such a context, this is the poem and not Notes Towards. Once I'd have squeezed it till it squealed, but the consequence of that too was uncertain. P.S. Facts and yarns do get skewed when we're writing poems. It seems there was a priest in the court of Norway who told Jacob Noyen that King Arthur found the Northwest Passage. When Mercator read this, he passed it on to D, although D surely knew that Secretary Cromwell had used Geoffrey of Monmouth's tale of Arthur's Imperium to back his master Henry's case against Rome. But however it went, one thing led to another. Although that's addressed to Paul Merchant, on my screen here I've got Jesse Glass grinning next to me. My fellow in D studies going back, and John D studies going back, I don't know, more than a decade, 2 decades. And so he had a different perspective on that poem than some of you probably. The Thames Barrier didn't show up in George III's visions, and so he drifted into Ballard's dystopia and witnessed the great flood of London, which the Thames Barrier, now winter rains falling in Greenland and 56 lakes are formed beneath the ice cap, will probably not avert. As the books fluttered around in the submerged libraries, George III dived down to snatch as many as he could, but almost certainly flung politicians' memoirs back in the drink. It was always my duty to protect science, he explained when he resurfaced, and I never made a friend of a minister. Easter Sunday service at St. Albans opens with praise for that martyr, without mention that because he needed for his meditation godly silence in the woods, he banished, or worse, the tales don't tell, the unmerciful nightingales. St. Alban would welcome the earlier springs of the 21st century, in which nightingales' wings have shortened to allow for a brood of 3 nestlings, an adaptation which also shortens their chance of surviving migration. With resultant silence, in the remnant woods of southern England, we can expect augmentation of saintly meditation. Thomas the Tank. I heard it when I'd only popped in the kitchen for a fill-up of coffee, was a gravy train. And perhaps unrelatedly, but after all, this happened in an offshore island of Europe in 2018. Daffodils and deadfalls, neighbourly as mushrooms, far-bidden pageants or murmur of myrmidons, lied to but relied on. As we've said ever since we viewed us from the moon, a blue planet, not to be mistaken for Sclaraffia, itself not to be mistaken for the Boys' Club founded in Prague in 1859, but the earthly 16th century paradise also called cocaine, where if you walk out on the luckiest of mornings, along a pastry pavement past barley sugar houses, either a fried pigeon or a grilled goose might, despite the sanctions of universal credit, fly straight into your starving mouth. Why did Yeats, Eliot, and Pound pretend in their youth to be old guys? How useful a disguise, how profound a truth. If you're young, discuss. That funny old codger, fussing in his garden about which plant goes where and what counts as a weed, was a poet once. And some days, even now, you'll see him pull not those girls, but a notebook from his pocket. Still scribbling and quibbling, still saying he intends to get it right in the end, face up and phrase perfect. As I walked out one morning, stepping niftily between inauspicious portals and familiar potholes, looking north and south, words not without warning, bereft in disbelief, despite unseasonal warning, froze in my mouth. What? I mean, wait. With too much on your mind, you fell backward? How awkward, untoward, to think too much of the Great War, of what came before and what it led to. Sure, incensed by documentary nonsense, half facts and flaws. As I walked out one morning, wondering what Ford Maddox Ford would make of the new year 2020, its discords, its imperfect vision, fall on his sword or yawning his head off, tuck it under his arm. Would Ford at last be lost for a word, or say, fuck that for a game of soldiers? You want my decision? Decayed at the edges, another decade pops up in Nova Johnsonia, where history pledges the same old swan song of hope and glory. So long, swan, so long a dying, poor swan, snared by a plot nobody mops up. As I walked out one morning, hoping to meet Sir George Ripley's ghost, a long shot, I grant you, but as I've been told, it was on that road that he prized from a squelched toad's head that jewel he'd begun transforming into, aren't you surprised? Not the stone of renewal, but fool's gold. The will of the people, perhaps only a wish or multiplicity of whispers, complicitly dispersed. I beg to go back to the beginning, the whips and duplicity or wills of the wisp. As I walked out one morning, earlier than anyone's usually about, when methane or another hydrocarbon still flickers on the marsh, when the floods had subsided and the reservoir so parched a drowned village was reborn. Here is the schoolhouse, and there was the steeple, and here after pillage souvenirs are the people. Watch how they do the short fall shuffle, wingless as a wine glass at tipping point, although it's no use looking for respite in semblance, with only things that can be touched, can be vouched for. Bankers falling off their perks as if. There is not to set aside questions raised by misplaced letters when claiming expenses on a spreadsheet laid out like a patient etherized, etc. If text, test, and tab stab, if either dither among newfound typos of ambiguity, how will I understand? How well I understand? Medallions of modality, pugnacious poignancies moving out of tearshot of honeymoon hotels for otiose homonyms. Narcissus psychosis, a kind of attitude sickness, also known as responsibility control, doing some serious imagery with focused obscurity, concurrus, withdrawals, purite tantrums, repercussions neither bidden nor forbidden, wrecked havoc Variant. An end to austerity, such as one sugared augury after another. Oye, oye, oye. Try tripping out on simultaneous stimulants, or remember Rita Hayworth stripping off her glove and play the beam on beams, boys. Variant. Buoyant as a buyout clause. Sucker for punishment, but please no applause. Prehistory's a comfort in the light, so to speak, of vast radio bursts. Maybe neutron stars embracing, if not broadcasts, bouncing home to tell us rats and pigeons will inherit the earth. They've been beat long enough. But as for me, my others are out on parallel parole. Correction, patrol. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. There's nothing much to say, left to say. So just a huge thank you to all of you. And we are going for dinner now. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.